Dear colleagues, make yourself comfortable. Welcome to Vienna. Welcome to the premises of the Energy Community Secretariat. Welcome to this third edition of the Vienna Energy Forum. On behalf of myself, on behalf of Lee Henscher, but also on behalf of Director Janez Kopač and Jean-Michel Clachon of the Florence School of Regulation. It's our great pleasure to see you here. Janez Kopač gave me, in order to open this third edition of the Vienna Energy Forum in style, a Hollywood device, which I will use now. So what you say as the film director of a great Hollywood movie, I don't know. But we are on camera, so the session and the forum starts right now. It is actually something very great to have a conference in your own premises. I recommend that to everybody. You should all have conferences back in your offices, because finally you get some action in the offices, and it is of course a precondition that you can rely on great organizers such as we have the privilege to be able to, in the form of Gosha, Barbara and Inga. They're somewhere around here and will make sure that the day goes very smoothly. Thank you for that smile, Barbara. Now, the keywords of this year's forum, and probably the keywords of every conference on energy these days, are markets and crisis. The opening up and the integrating of energy markets was at the origin of the creation, the establishment, development of energy law as well in Europe. We thought, people thought in the 1990s, when they started to build this house of European energy policy, of European energy law, that they will have the luxury of building it on a stable ground, you know, one layer, one floor after the other. But it turned out that actually already the ground was shaking and becomes increasingly shaking. What we probably didn't realize at the time in the 1990s, that also the energy sector is subject to globalization. We have to build that house. We have to integrate markets in Europe, not in isolation, but we saw, for example, as a consequence of the shale gas boom in the United States, how energy price competition all over the world has become a global affair, and not to speak about climate change, of course. In 2014, the year behind us, was supposed to be the end date for the completion of the internal market. Now, given the complexity of the matter, it probably was clear to everybody that this was rather a motivation factor than a true end date. This is, in good or in bad, a never-ending story, the creation of an internal market. And of course, we remember how the complexity of the whole endeavor increased when in 2007 Europe decided to also instrumentalize energy policy in the fight of climate change, one of the great challenges for our generation. We thought at the time that we'd be very smart in integrating this new objective of energy European energy law in on a market based on market principles, cap and trade measures and mechanisms and so on. That didn't really turn out the way we thought it would. Maybe it has to do with the fact that as Europeans we are more used to the classical administrative approach and couldn't really cope with that. In any way, the emissions trading scheme never really took off. The renewables turned, instead of being market-based, they turned out to rely on several layers of subsidies which have a distorting effect on that market, and we'll have a panel today which will look, among other things, also into the question of whether and maybe why the renewables have become a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution, and what can be done to fix that. Now, this entire development has led to what can be called, maybe without much exaggeration, a crisis of the internal market as such. The state of the market, the internal crisis of the European market, is partly due to the design, partly also due to the lack of innovation from which we suffer here in Europe. And it is for sure also a challenge for us as energy lawyers, maybe also something that we haven't really lived up to, that challenge, in not always taking the holistic approach it needs to look at energy policy in general, in a more comprehensive way. We all work on our little areas, be it regulatory, be it competition, be it project-based, etc. And I think it is also a challenge, but an objective also for communities such as ours to make sure that we can contribute from the legal side to a better design of the European energy markets. Another issue that directly links to us lawyers is that the enforcement record all over Europe is poor. And we'll have a panel addressing that today as well. But besides this internal crisis, much more visible is the external crisis in which Ukraine is in the center, where in the afternoon we have a very interesting panel as well. You can doubt, if we talk about crisis and markets, whether Adam Smith's famous invisible hand, which is supposed to transform individual egoism into the common good in some miraculous way, can actually work if there is a very visible iron fist, which basically works precisely to the opposite. And the good news, I believe, is that after 3 crises originating somewhere on the border between Ukraine and Russia, Europe has stopped fiddling around with amending security of supply regulations here and there and talking about increasing transparency of intergovernmental agreements, but really decided to come up with a grand design called the Energy Union. We'll have a panel on this. The protagonists are already sitting here at the stage in a minute. And the decisive question which we have to pose to that energy union and the concept, which is now already public, is whether it actually will manage to internalize the external crisis, or to be more precise, the constant possibility of crisis, whether this is something that we can react to and in that sense also prevent or at least cope with in a new design. But before we move to that panel, I have the great pleasure now, and Lee gave that privilege to me, that I may introduce Professor Helmut Schmitt von Sydow, who's sitting here to my left. And he will speak on the only truly enjoyable event in 2015, that is the 10th anniversary of the energy community. He is doing that not only as a professor of energy law at Lausanne and Parma, not only as a former director and chief legal advisor in DG Tren at the time, but as one, maybe the father of the energy community. He has been, was it these premises, to create, no, that was before.
The building did not exist yet.
The building. So he's been all around the Balkans and of course in Brussels, in many meetings, many negotiations, and many work in between from his desk to make sure that the energy community, which is today such an essential part of the European energy governance, will be established together with his partners. And I'm sure during all that time and all these events, there's a lot of interesting anecdotes and memories that you would like to share with us. And with this, I would like to give you the floor to speak on the energy community at its 10th anniversary, the new pan-European energy governance. Thank you very much and enjoy the forum.
Das ist auch auf dem Bildschirm da hinten. Ne? Okay. Thank you very much. Dirk Buschle, where is he now? Modest as always in the second row. Thank you for the invitation. No, indeed, it's the first time that I'm here in Vienna at the premises of the energy community. But I was involved in the birth of the energy community, chairing the intergovernmental conference which negotiated that treaty 10 years ago and drafted the wording. And some insight into the process may explain why there are certain difficulties in the treaty, weak points, and perhaps also some strong points. That's what I'm trying to speak about. One should know that the objectives of the role of the energy community has changed slightly in the last 10 years because the geopolitical scene and the energy scene, globalization, has changed, and also because the energy community has grown up and become a real full-fledged, well-working organization. In the beginning, the idea was just to create a link between the the countries of Southeast Europe, between them and the rest of the community. In order to advance, I guess I push here. Yes, here we are. You see, we were under the impression of that blackout, famous blackout in 2000. There are always disasters. Blackout in 2003, 28th November. This is not a picture of the blackout. It's a picture of the normal life, electricity life in Europe. You see Benelux well illuminated. You see the northern Italy. There was a problem at in Switzerland when Italy imported too much French nuclear energy, electricity, via Switzerland at the Lukmania Pass. And the line was overloaded, it stretched, and it fell against, it touched a tree, which led to a dysfunction of that, a blockage of that line. And as the electricity had then to go through other lines, the Gotthard line broke down, and one after the other, all the 20 lines linking Italy with its neighbors broke down, because that is the lesson we learned at that time. Electricity finds its way itself. You can't tell electricity where it has to go. The problem was here, the initial problem. But as Italy was low voltage, sucking in, attracting electricity, and France had too much electricity, the electricity found its way to the direct lines, through Austria, through Slovenia. All these lines broke down, and afterwards in Italy also the lines broke down, and there was a complete electricity failure, a complete blackout during the 28th of September 2003. Fortunately, it was a Sunday. So we learned that that we are all interlinked, despite legal regulations. So we have to cooperate administratively, technically, and the initial problem was indeed a communication problem between the Swiss operator and the Italian operator. So the first thing was to create a secure network, to re-establish the networks in Southeast Europe, which had been destroyed during the Civil War, and also to link Greece to the rest of the European Union. I call it European Union, also, even if it was called differently at that time. The rest of the European Union, as Bulgaria, Romania, were not yet members of the European Union as they are now. The second objective was to prepare those countries for accession if they wished to do accession. And the third item, indirectly, not official item, but indirectly, was to contribute to a climate of stability and peace after 10 years, 12 years of fratricide, of civil war in Southeast Europe, which is not without remembering the beginnings of the European integration, European Community for Steel and Coal. It's only later now that the energy community plays an part and plays an even increasing part as concerns security of supply and a pan-European strategy for energy supply. I've got a picture of the negotiation team when they initialed, it's called in diplomatic terms, the treaty after having done all the text. Jean-Michel Glachon, where is he? No, he's not on the picture.
Simon Usunov.
Where is he? Show me.
Simon? Yeah. Here in the room or on the picture? On the picture.
Behind.
Yeah, in the last row, smiling.
They're all smiling.
Yeah. Simon, can you stand up?
Here. I believe he has a telephone call with Ukraine at the moment.
The other day I was in a conference with Jean-Michel Glachon, who stands up, yes? But that's Jean-Michel Glachon. Guten Morgen. The other day I attended a conference by Jean-Michel, and he showed picture from his youth when he was a baby, so I dare to show some picture from my youth. The climate, the working climate, the working climate was difficult in the sense that those people, there was a lot of mistrust among those countries, and which showed another picture. That's at the final drink. You see, the Turkey was participating all of the negotiations until the last moment. When we signed the treaty, we even had on the evening 2 different versions, one with Turkey and one without Turkey. It was only clear at the very morning of that day that Turkey would not sign yet, not initial yet. The other item which was tricky was UNMIK, because there was the problems of the legal status of UNMIK. When UNMIK was represented by a diplomat from the United Nations, and that diplomat, right at the beginning, told the conference that he was a diplomat. He was not from Kosovo. He didn't understand much of energy, so he had brought along a representative of the Ministry of Energy of Kosovo, and he would like him to speak. That made an uproar. Half of the delegations said they would leave the room if the representative of the Ministry of Kosovo would speak. The other half said that they would leave the room if he was not allowed to speak. We found a compromise, typical diplomatic, almost Belgian compromise, making his voice heard in the conference room without being legally part of the conference. But just to show you that there were some tensions in the beginning, and the main idea was not to contribute to the pan-European strategy and to governance, but just try to come together and to find some solutions for them. I go back to the other picture, and more people on that. Now, what are so the idea was not to create new governments, but nevertheless, incidentally, they did create some new items and some interesting items. The strong points, governmentally, point of view of governance, are the institutions. The energy community is not structured like a classical international organization. You have a council which resembles a little bit the Council of the European Union. You have a secretariat which resembles a little bit to the Commission, but not yet called as such, and not yet with all the powers, but that may be part of the reform discussion going on. During the negotiations, delegates felt that they couldn't entrust too much power to the Secretariat, which they didn't know yet. It has not yet been constructed. There were several delegations who trusted more the Commission from the outside, technical knowledge, experience in internal market. They wanted to give as much power to the European Commission, which was not fully possible neither, because the European Commission was part of the European Union, which was a part of the party to the treaty itself. But it explains why in the second chapter on the internal market, on energy policy, the Commission has a right of initiative, and indeed not only a right to do proposals, but also the right to withdraw proposals, something which was contested, more and more contested inside the European Union at that time, but it's written in the treaty. And interestingly, from a legal point of view, the Commission, when it does such proposals, it does not so on behalf of the European Union with the mandate of the Council in Brussels, but ad personam, because it has the right of initiative, just because it's the European Commission which developed the initiated the legislation also in Brussels. Another thing which is modern, where the Energy Community Treaty is more advanced than the treaties of the European Union, is the mentioning of the regulators and of the fora. They are enshrined in the Energy Community Treaty. Also, they are not yet have net all the powers one may have expect, and they don't have all the links with the regulators and the fora of the European Union as one may want. So the Treaty on the Energy Community is more modern than the Rome Treaties, the Paris Treaty, creating the European Community, European Union afterwards. There is a chapter. There are provisions on the environment, on renewables. Environment, by the way, which is one of the reasons why Turkey did at the end not sign the treaty, because they had several reservations linked to the relations between the Iraq and Turkey and in the regions of the Kurds linked to environment. And there are modern formulations of the free movement of goods. Most of all, there is a chapter on trade policy, which seems normal because we have a chapter on trade policy in the treaty establishing the European Union and the treaty on the function of the European Union. But here it's spelled out clearly that trade policy applies to energy policy, which has been forgotten a little bit in the European Union for 20, 30, 40 years. Member states did their external relations at their own discretion without bothering about competences of the European Union, and the European Union did not dare to insist on the European Union. They have now to try to overcome that delay, and they're trying so. That's one of the reasons of the energy union, to have more competence in the external part. But from a legal point of view, that competence for external policy, for trade policy, exists already under the Rome Treaty, as has been, and the Treaty on the Function of the European Union, as has been confirmed at the end of last year by a landmark decision of the European Court of Justice. Trade policy in energy matters is exclusive competence of the European Union. Individual member states do not have that competence. But we will come perhaps during the conference at the practical difficulties of applying this. Then you should know that in those days there was a request by a Polish Prime Minister, not Donald Tusk yet, that we need mutual assistance in energy matters versus third countries. The famous mutual assistance clause of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. So that Prime Minister had said, or we copy Article 5 and we put it into the Treaty of the European Union, or we add energy to the NATO Treaty. Both ideas were feasible. NATO was happy because they were looking for new jobs, and energy has a strategic importance. It's a problem if you do it from bottom up, then you look at military security, at security in general, and you come to energy, or if you look at it from the bottom, technical internal market, blackouts, and then you come upwards to cooperation mutual assistance. The point is, and indeed this idea of the Polish Prime Minister was then taken up in the treaty, in the new energy chapter of the Lisbon Treaty, where there is a reference, just 3 words, to the spirit of solidarity. But in the Treaty of the Energy Community, there is such a clause of mutual assistance. So the Energy Community Treaty is going farther than the Treaty of the European Union, although that mutual assistance clause requires unanimity in the Council of Ministerial Council, and that makes it difficult to apply it in practice, perhaps. But the Treaty on Energy Community is more evolved, and the European Union has more obligations of assistance versus the Energy Community contracting parties, including Ukraine, then they have mutual assistance obligations between the member states, the 28 member states of the European Union. I skip the language problem. It's the only treaty which is, European treaty which is valid only in English language. And that was because when the French and the Italians asked that it should also be valid in French, in German, in Spanish, the Turkish delegation said that they were the biggest country in number of inhabitants, and Turkish was the language which was most spoken in that new energy community, and that Turkish should be at least the second language. At that moment, the French, the Italians, everybody, we scrapped the article on languages. There's no article. You just have a treaty which is written in English. So, incidentally, English has become the official language. And fourth item, flexibility. There is a flexibility clause allowing to extend the topics covered by the energy community, from gas and electricity to other energy sources and carriers, and to other network industries. We thought of air traffic, which was a problem there, railroad, all the network problems, telecommunications. And that the treaty can be extended without a new intergovernmental conference. We just paved the way. It was an offer for the colleagues from other sectors, but they didn't take it up. And the other item is that there is a flexibility clause that you can make new contracting parties adhere to the energy community without a new intergovernmental conference, without a ratification of that accession treaty. This can be done just by a decision of the Ministerial Council. But of course, in the Ministerial Council, each minister will check if his home government is in agreement or not. But it's a more flexibility clause than the accession procedure, for example, of the European Union. In the beginning, we were not sure how the baby should be called. Some thought it would be extended to other topics, like telecommunications, like traffic, and they just wanted to call it the Southeast Community. Southeast European Community, and others said it was more important to have that openness, geographical openness. So that's why, in the end, we couldn't. They called it energy community, sticking for the moment to energy, but opening to other countries, and indeed, even not only in Southeast Europe, but even Norway felt encouraged to apply. Now, what are the weak points of government? Some people say the problem of today is investment, and there is not a single word about investment in that treaty of creating the energy community. Now, that was with intentionally. We avoided the word investment because the camera is still running, and the press is writing, okay. We avoided the word investment because that would have meant a shared competence with member states. And many of the neighboring member states of Southeast Europe, Greece, Italy, were very keen that this should be a treaty not just between the countries of Southeast Europe and the European Union as such, but on the other, that there should also be Italy, Greece, and the other member states of the European Union partners of that contracting partners, signatures of this treaty. And delegations felt that it was better that the European Union would speak with one voice, because experience in international negotiations in the traffic sector, in the telecommunication sector, road, air traffic, has shown that when there is the European Union, one sitting next to the member states, and once it's the European Union who's speaking, once it's the member states are speaking, and they're even speaking in divergent manners, that creates confusion. So there is no word on investment, and indeed the treaty was signed on behalf of the European Union, only by the European Union, but not by individual member states. And investment, of course, was indirectly settled. There is no investment fund in the energy community, but by creating a stable framework, we give more confidence to investors. Indeed, European Investment Bank, the World Bank were observers at the Intergovernmental Conference creating the treaty to see how stable this would look like. And once there is a stable framework, legal framework in Southeast Europe, investors will also come. The second problem is dispute settlement. There is a panel on that later on, so I will be short. The dispute settlement was just copied from Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union, which deals with very important violations of basic values, of fundamental rights, of democracy, and so on. Some countries wanted, Turkey especially, a court of the energy community, but the others said that for a community which initially was foreseen to last 10 years, it was superfluous to create a court, and indeed that court would have had no much work during the first 10 years. So they were against. They thought that they could apply, if necessary, to the European Court of Justice, but then Turkey was against, because they had in mind not only infringement procedures between the Secretariat and individual contracting parties, or between contracting parties from Southeast Europe, they had also in mind disputes between contracting parties, Turkey, and the European Union. And they said in such a case, if we disagree with the European Union's behavior in the energy community, we don't want to go to the Luxembourg Court of the European Union. So we need a specific court. And that was one of the official arguments, the second official argument, environment, and this one, why Turkey finally did not sign the treaty. Official arguments. Unofficial arguments are, of course, the link, the synchronization with the overall negotiations of Turkey for accession to the European Union. And yeah, now the problem comes up. You will see, I think that is a good sign that these problems come up now, because they show that the energy community is becoming adult. In the initial European Union, in the first 12 years, 15 years, in the 60s, let's say, in the 50s and 60s, there were not many infringement procedures because there was not much legislation. But once in the 70s, when the legislation should have been applied, there were infringement procedures, and whereas there had been the exception in the beginning, they are now a normal common day procedure. So it's not a bad sign that there are infringement procedures. It's just a sign that the energy community is coming to cruising speed. Finally, the geopolitical role of the energy community and its link to the energy union. Now we will have a panel on that. May I just remind you that the idea of the energy community has come up in different ways. The first was Philippe Herzog of the French think tank Confrontation Europe 10 years ago. He proposed an energy community, what he called an energy community, which was in reality a closer cooperation in the energy field. When the draft convention of Giscard d'Estaing failed, where there had been an energy chapter, include an energy chapter. He thought it was nevertheless necessary to have an energy chapter, an energy legislation. And as everybody thought that the convention was dead and didn't dare yet to dream of the Lisbon Treaty, he proposed that energy community, something in addition to the energy, to the European Union. Now he had two errors. One error was that he called it energy community without knowing that that name already exists, so there was some confusion there. And secondly, his idea of having separate treaty was slightly overtaken by the Lisbon Treaty, who has an energy chapter. But of course, that energy chapter is not perfect. Energy chapter of the Lisbon Treaty has 3 steps forward and 1 step backwards on each item. That's why he thought it was still necessary. And indeed, he got support from the law and from the Florence School of Regulation, with all the studies you did on Schengenization of energy, permitting for closer cooperation on energy matters for those member states of the European Union who want to do most. So that was an idea of closer cooperation with a reduced number of participants. Then Donald Tusk, 1 year ago, took that, promoted an energy union, but from a different point of view, of that famous Polish point of view, external relations, how to have a better bargaining position versus supplying countries, Russia and other supplying countries. So it was not reducing the participants, but was more extending the participants, especially when afterwards Buschle came up with the idea that there should be an energy union covering everything, the European Union, the energy community, and the Mediterranean cooperation agreements, to which the Kopacz and Buschle rightly answered very politely and indirectly last year that the European Union is already part of the energy community, so there's no sense to have an umbrella above the energy community and the energy union. One should perhaps think of improving the energy community. Now, President Juncker last July, when he presented himself to the European Parliament, took up the word energy union from Mr. Tusk and just said, I propose an energy union. Now, I didn't speak to him, I don't know him personally, but I don't know how much he has looked into the matter, in the sense he had the word union as a buzzword for closer cooperation everywhere. He promotes, of course, a monetary and economic and monetary union. He proposed a banking union. He proposed in his speech a union for democratic change. So he proposed also an energy union. And then he said, I have two commissioners, a vice president and commissioner, who will deal with it. And I guess that was in July. I guess that then in August, the poor officials of the European Commission, doing the briefings for the future candidates to become commissioners and vice presidents, did the briefing. And how did they do the briefing? They looked into their drawers and they took out all the ideas they had there for a long time. And that's why you have now a proposal by the Commission, a paper by the Commission on the energy union, which covers everything, which on the first side may look awkward. Jean-Michel Glachon calls it an empty box because there's nothing in there. In reality, and everybody can imagine everything in there. It reminds me of President Delors when he launched the internal market package 30 years ago, in 1985, when he combined 300 proposals of all the different fields of community life into one package, a comprehensive package, and in times of Euroscepticism, Euro-pessimism, of crisis, it can be a motivation factor, as you said this morning in another context. And in this sense, Ukraine can even help. The Ukraine crisis can help to push forward the energy union, because it fills that box. And as you you like to quote Hillary Clinton, never waste a crisis. European integration has very often advanced when there was a crisis. But we will have a panel on a specific panel on that. I'm very happy to attend this panel and to attend the whole meeting today. I hope that the energy union will give a boost to the European Union as well as to the energy community. And I wish you a very successful conference today. Thank you very much.